Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I had the great pleasure for several years of having an expatriate Polish woman named Halina Stanek as my secretary. She taught me two things. One, the importance of saying thank you. So I apologize for my pronunciation. Dziękuję, thank you for having me here. Second, she taught me the vital importance of never, ever making a Polish woman angry, so I promise this will be done in 10 minutes. I have a fairly narrow focus, but I think it's an important one. What I'd like to talk about is what I believe to be a gap in the legal protections that are provided to service providers who fall outside the definition of sort of the traditional internet service providers that we've all grown up with. And what I refer to this as in the program is why coffee shops should be concerned. The formal term I use in my thesis is adjunct service providers. And these are entities that you don't buy your service from, but we've all gotten used to having wireless availability everywhere we eat, everywhere we stay, in libraries. It's just to be expected as we see the signs all over the place here telling us what the Wi-Fi password is for this conference indicates. Libraries, I do include in here, under national law, there may be some protections that aren't afforded some of these other entities, which we'll get to in a minute. When addressing the issue of whether or not these sort of new ISPs, the ASPs as I call them, are protected, both nations and courts have to balance competing interests. The interest in this question is that courts and nations are now required to make sure that there is an enforcement capability against indirect infringement. Now, indirect infringement is called different things around the world. It can be secondary infringement. It can be inducement to infringe. But the idea here basically is that you're going after somebody who is not directly infringing copyright, but who has either enabled it or has a service that helps do it, something along those lines. And I can spend 3 hours talking about technical aspects of that, but that would bore everyone, so we're not going to do that. At the same time, we have the e-commerce directive, which very clearly sets out that there are supposed to be protections for service providers. And these are the so-called safe harbors. The three that are of concern in EU, of course, are the mere conduit, caching, and hosting safe harbors. One thing that it's really, really important to point out here is that there's no protection whatsoever against parties seeking injunctive relief against service providers. Now, I'm a practicing attorney, so clients come to me when they have problems. Injunctions are a problem. They are costly. You have to fight against them. And the mere fact that it's not a trial, and this isn't a complaint, doesn't make things any less expensive. So what are some sort of hidden reefs in these safe harbors? What are things that can cause problems? As we've heard about throughout the seminar, and we all know, there are dozens of different national laws at play, just in the EU. Many of these national requirements have specific record-keeping requirements. And in the United States, we have a version of this called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act that has very specific requirements that you have to meet. You have to have an address where people can send you copyright violation notices and ask you to take material down. There's some technical requirements that you have to maintain, and these are generally higher for conduit safe harbors and some of the other safe harbors. In some countries, such as Australia, the government has even gone so far as to say if you are an ASP, you're probably not covered by our regime. We have fast-forwarded through a bunch of slides here. So all of this creates a lot of uncertainty for ASPs. These are businesses. Businesses do not like uncertainty. It costs them money. It makes it difficult to figure out what they should and shouldn't be doing in the future. And they would like to know. Some of these costs, as I've said, can be extraordinarily high. And the European Union courts seem to be drifting toward a position that litigation costs won't be assessed under a safe harbor, but that the injunction costs will be. This was made particularly clear recently in the case of McFadden, which just came out a few weeks ago. I really urge anyone who has not read this to read through it very carefully. They were asked to deal with a number of questions that were either open or needed clarification. There was an excellent Attorney General opinion, which the court read but did not adopt every aspect of. But it did provide some guidance on enforcement, because there was particularly some issues about whether or not ASPs could be required to monitor their service. And the court said, well, no. They did say that ASPs were covered under the heading of information side use of service, which had been an open issue. That they did qualify for the mere conduit safe harbor, and that there were some restrictions on this. And this is where there's a problem. What they said is, and this is somewhat in line with previous rulings of the court, that ASPs could be required to have passwords, even for free access, as a way of preventing this infringement. Now, they gave no guidance as to how often those passwords had to be changed, what records had to be kept, but because they said that the purpose of the password was to provide a way to identify the user, it suggests to me this is not simply a change your password every month rule, but this is in fact going to be a keep records and let us know, so that you can let us know if we ask who was online, because they specifically say you have to have a password as a way of showing the user's identity. So the mere fact that it says password, I don't think should be taken to mean just password. They also did very specifically say that, yes, ISPs are going to be liable for pre-litigation costs. Now, because of the perceived need by right holders to ensure that their property isn't being frittered away, we know that ISPs get injunctions, and we can assume that ASPs will be exactly the same way. And that has been the pattern throughout the world, in the United States, Canada, Great Britain, and the EU. What are the implications for all of this? Well, member states have different views of copyright, have different views of the importance of copyright. If they want to circumvent some of the safe harbor defenses, they can embark on a new strategy simply of shifting their laws to make essentially the fines and/or compensation part of that pre-litigation injunction, which would tremendously increase the expense. The EU has referred back the question of whether ASPs are required to retain identification information, which should suggest to any legislator who wants to have that information that they should put that into their national laws. What are some solutions? Well, we could certainly go about this at the EU level and have another directive that would clarify that. Not going to happen. We could have some sort of national level solution. This will probably be what happens. My concern, though, is that this gives nation states a bit of a club, and that they can use this against people. I urge you to look at the background of McFadden by what I mean, because the law can be a terrible weapon as well as a great shield. So thank you very much.